There is no such thing as a victimless sin. Every sin, every crime, every lie, every act of greed, every act of selfishness produces a victim. Every single one of them does. In fact, it produces victims sometimes for generations. Here's a true story. I got involved in the story later in its development. A young man, 17-ish, convinces a young woman, 17-ish, that if she loves him, she'll have relations with him. It's an act of injustice on two levels. First of all, he's lying, which is an act of injustice. And second, he's using that which does not belong to him. Her body does not belong to him. Until you're in a committed married relationship, no one else's sexuality belongs to you. She accepts his argument and becomes pregnant. Now follow this. All he did was offer one single sentence. If you love me, you'll do this. She becomes pregnant. Because she's a Christian, she's not going to commit abortion, but she's not very mature either. She has the baby. Who ends up raising the baby? Her parents do, because he's long gone now. The parents raise a baby, and though they love the baby, we'll say a baby girl, though they love the little girl, they're really at a point where he's just not interested. The father's not, and the mother works. They can't do what they know they ought to be able to do. So this young girl grows up in what feels like a broken home to her. By the time she's 13 or 14 years old, the one thing she wants more than anything else is some male, because remember, she hasn't had a father, some male who will just love her. And so she ends up living a promiscuous life, and she becomes pregnant now at age 15 or 16. And now suddenly there's a baby to be born that nobody cares about. And I want to tell you something. By the time you reach the third generation, there is so much dysfunction in the lives of these babies, the lives of these children. There is so much pain and so much hurt. There is poverty. There are addictions. There are mental health issues. And you know where it started? It started all the way back here when this young man told a lie and acted unjustly. His unjust action has left a legacy now of debt, where people are constantly having to pay up his debts. That's why justice is so important. It's why we instinctively understand somebody has to pay for every crime I commit. And that answers the question, why did Jesus have to die? Because some of us think to ourselves, well, I'm a pretty good guy. I don't know that I have that many debts left unpaid. But if you're honest with yourself, you know that your lies, your misbehaviors, your missed opportunities to do what's right, your selfishness, your greed, whatever it is, they have affected thousands of people, people whose names you don't even know. Let me read to you how Paul describes the sinfulness of humanity apart from Jesus. By the way, this is every person. He's talking about every person. Without Jesus, this is who we are. He just lists the sins of humans. There is no one righteous, he says, not even one. There is no one who understands. There is no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They've together become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Paul is describing the state of humanity without Jesus. Now, I just want to say, it's an odd thing to find yourself trying to convince people that they're sinners when you live in a culture that basically says everything is okay. Let me ask you a question. When you open up your newspapers or turn on the news reports, does everything look okay to you? Everybody feel good about the direction of the country? Everybody feel like we're in the right place now? Everybody feel good about what's going on in the world today? Let me tell you something. The reason the world is falling apart is because we're bad people. We're selfish. We're sinners. And what we have not done is counted the cost of the injustices we commit. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is God said, I want a relationship with you, and I want it so badly that I will pay your debt. I personally will pay it. You see, God couldn't just say, I forgive you, without someone absorbing the debt you owe. Can I use this illustration? This will sound partisan. I don't mean it in a partisan way. But recently, by executive order, the president has forgiven a number of student loans. I think Americans could perhaps miss what's going on there. So here's what you need to know. The loans really aren't forgiven, are they? It's not as though the money's not going to be spent. All that happened was those who owed the money transferred the debt to somebody else. Now somebody else is paying the debt, but the debt has to be paid. If you take out a mortgage and you default on the mortgage, does that mean that the debt will never be paid? That's not what it means. All it means is somebody else will have to pay the debt, because every debt still has to be paid. Every debt gets paid one way or the other. So when God looks at sinful humanity that's been in rebellion against him, what God realizes is there's a debt that they cannot pay. See, you can't pay all your debts. How can you go back to your childhood? How can you go back to the people you might have mistreated or lied to? How can you even find them? Some of them are not even here. I didn't always treat my mother well. What do? My mother's been deceased now for 20 years. I can't go back to her and make it right. She's not here anymore. I remember doing something. When I start confessing, it gets risky. When I was a teenager, I worked for a grocery store in Smyrna. And I remember stealing, I'm confessing this, I stole a notebook because I didn't have any notebook paper, I didn't have any money. I just stole it one night as I was working in the store. The store was closed, and I stole it. I don't know what it cost, 50 cents, whatever it cost. And that haunted me. Man, that haunted me so much. I still haven't forgotten it, obviously. And probably 20 years later, I went back to the owner of the store, and I said, I stole a notebook here when I was in high school, and I want to pay you back for it. And I don't remember what I offered to pay, but it's a whole lot more than I thought it was worth. And the owner kind of laughed. I would tell you who it is. Y'all know the family. And said, well, that was a long time ago. And I said, I need you to take this money, and I need you to forgive me, because I can't be right with God, I can't be right with the universe, and I cannot be right with myself until I make this right with you. But you can't do that with everything. You've been through an ugly divorce. How do you go back and make it all right? I'm not suggesting it was all your fault, but how do you make it right? There are some things we just can't undo. And God, in his mercy, says, all right, here's how I'm going to resolve that. I'm going to take your punishment myself. And that will absolve you of your guilt. And it will open a way for you to have fellowship with me. And that's the crucifixion. As Isaiah says, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. When Jesus came up to John the Baptist's ministry, John sees Jesus and says, look, it's the Lamb of God, that's a sacrificial lamb, who takes away the sin of the world. Jesus died as a martyr, but his death is much bigger than martyrdom. A lot of people have died as martyrs. Jesus' death is more than a martyrdom. Jesus' death is an atoning sacrifice. It's a ransom. It's a payoff that sets you free. It's the cancellation of your debts. And by the way, one reason why certainly Christians on the left in the U.S. sometimes hesitate over this is, first of all, because they understand that if Jesus is the atoning sacrifice, Jesus is the only way. I'll just remind you, Muhammad didn't die for you. Buddha didn't die for you. Jesus died for you. If Jesus died for you, he is the one and only way, which is exactly what he says. I am the way. He says, I am the truth and I am the life, and nobody gets to the Father except through me. The second thing that many on the left don't like about this is that it says we're all sinners. And the golden project of the last 100 years or so in North America is to get to this perfect utopia. If we just try a little harder, we'll all be perfectible. And that's just not true. That at the end of the day, we require the sacrifice of Jesus because all of us have blood on our hands. And that's why Jesus can be described as the one who takes away the sin of the world. He says of himself, I didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give my life, he says, as a ransom for many. Paul's whole argument in the letter to the Romans is just this, that we cannot, by our own merits, ever be right with God. Nobody will be so good that God would say, well, we don't have any choice on this one. He has to go to heaven. Nobody's that good. That's why Jesus is required. None of us can pay off the debt of all the sins we've committed. And so Paul says God presented Christ as the sacrifice of atonement to demonstrate God's rightness. That is, Jesus proves that God is a just God to those in the past whose sins weren't forgiven and to those in the present. So in God's sacrifice of Jesus, God preserves his justice while exercising to us his mercy.